Picture yourself waking up in 1955 in a quiet American suburb. You hear the soft clink of glass bottles on the porch before sunrise. A truck hums down the street, stopping at every third or fourth house. A man in a white uniform jogs up the walkway, swaps empty bottles for full ones, and disappears before you've even poured your coffee. This happened in nearly every neighborhood in America, every single day. Now walk outside today. No truck, no bottles, no white uniform. Just a refrigerated carton sitting in a grocery store under fluorescent lights, identical in Seattle, Miami, and everywhere in between. The milkman didn't fade away slowly. He nearly vanished completely, and almost nobody noticed the exact moment it happened. At his peak in the early 1950s, the milkman wasn't a quaint tradition, he was infrastructure. Roughly half of all milk sold in America came straight to the front door. Entire companies, fleets of trucks, and tens of thousands of jobs existed solely to support daily doorstep delivery. It made sense because of one simple fact: refrigeration at home was unreliable and often small. Families couldn't store much milk safely, so daily delivery wasn't a luxury. It was the only practical solution. The milkman was essentially a walking refrigerator, showing up before the heat of the day so the milk stayed fresh from farm to porch in under 24 hours. So what killed something that essential? Three forces, arriving almost at the exact same time. First, the home refrigerator. By the mid-1950s, refrigerators had gotten dramatically bigger, cheaper, and more reliable. A typical American kitchen could now store a week's worth of milk instead of a single day's. The entire reason daily delivery existed started disappearing overnight. Second, the supermarket boom. Stores like Kroger and Safeway had been expanding fast since the 1930s, but post-war suburbia turned them into the default place families shopped. Supermarkets discovered something the milkman never could compete with. Milk sold in bulk at a grocery store was significantly cheaper than home delivery, because supermarkets eliminated the cost of the truck, the driver, and the daily route. A gallon at the store could run 15 to 20% less than home-delivered milk. For a family on a budget, that difference added up fast. Third, and this is the part almost nobody talks about, the Interstate Highway System. Once highways connected dairy farms to massive centralized processing plants, milk could travel hundreds of miles instead of staying local. This created economies of scale home delivery routes simply couldn't match. A regional dairy plant could now serve an entire metro area's grocery stores more efficiently than dozens of small delivery routes ever could. The collapse happened faster than people expected. In 1950, around 50% of milk was home delivered. By 1963, that number had crashed to under 30%. By the early 1970s, it had fallen below 10%. Today, home-delivered milk accounts for a tiny fraction of 1% of total sales, essentially a novelty service in a handful of cities rather than a national norm. Here's the detail that makes this story sting a little. The milkman wasn't just selling a product, he was part of the neighborhood's daily rhythm. He knew which houses had new babies and needed extra milk. He knew which families were struggling and quietly left an extra bottle without charging for it. He was often the first person to notice if something seemed wrong at a house. A milkman finding undelivered bottles piling up on a porch was, more than once, how a community discovered an elderly neighbor needed help. That kind of quiet social infrastructure doesn't show up in any sales chart, but it disappeared right alongside the bottles. There's also a hidden environmental twist most people don't think about. The old milk bottle system was a closed loop. Glass bottles were collected, sanitized, and reused up to 30 or 40 times before being retired. It was, by accident rather than intention, one of the most efficient reuse systems America has ever had. When delivery died, it took that reuse system with it. The cartons and plastic jugs that replaced glass bottles were cheaper to produce at scale, but designed to be thrown away after a single use. We traded a closed loop for convenience, and convenience won. A few cities never fully let it go. Boston, parts of New England, and a scattering of independent dairies in the Midwest still run small delivery routes today. In the last decade, some of them have actually seen demand creep back up, driven by people chasing nostalgia, sustainability, or just glass bottles that taste, supposedly, slightly better than plastic. But these are boutique operations now, a tiny specialty service, not the backbone of how a nation gets its milk. It's worth comparing this to how other countries handled the same pressures. In the UK, doorstep milk delivery actually survived much longer, in part because the country never built suburbia around the same highway and supermarket model America did, and tight-knit urban streets kept short delivery routes economically viable for decades longer. In much of Europe today, smaller neighborhood dairies and weekly markets fill a similar role that the milkman once played here. Different infrastructure, different outcome, same basic need. So what really happened to the American milkman? He wasn't defeated by changing tastes or outdated technology. He was defeated by exactly the same forces that reshaped everything else in this country during that era. Bigger refrigerators, bigger supermarkets, and bigger highways, all arriving within the same single decade and making daily doorstep delivery mathematically obsolete almost overnight. The next time you grab a plastic jug of milk off a shelf without thinking twice, remember there was a version of America where that simply wasn't how it worked. Where a stranger in a white uniform quietly kept an eye on your street before the sun came up, one bottle at a time. Did your family ever have milk delivered? Or is this the first time you've heard any of this? Tell me in the comments. And if you're curious about another everyday American habit with a hidden history behind it, there's a video right here about why American houses are built from wood instead of stone.